The space around Kepler 442 looked empty and dark like always. Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the exploration ship Endeavour and watched the stars through the big window. His crew had been traveling for 3 months to reach this distant system. They came here to look for new planets and maybe find signs of life. Jake was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes. He had been exploring space for 20 years. Next to him stood Dr. Lisa Chang, a scientist who studied ocean life on Earth. She was small and quiet but very smart about living things. On the other side of the bridge, Dr. Alex Rodriguez worked at his computer. He was an expert on old civilizations and loved to find artifacts from the past. Lieutenant Sophie Turner sat at the communications desk. She was young and had bright red hair. Sophie was very good at learning new languages and understanding patterns in sounds. Captain Ryan Brooks worked in the engine room below. He could fix any machine and had a special talent for understanding how things worked. The Endeavour was a good ship. It had strong engines, powerful scanners, and comfortable living spaces for the crew. They had enough food and supplies for 6 months. Jake hoped they would find something interesting before they had to go home. On their 4th day in the system, Lisa found something strange. She was using the ship's scanners to look at an asteroid field when she saw an unusual energy reading. The energy came from the biggest asteroid in the field. It was much bigger than the others and had a weird shape. Jake came to look at her screen. The energy pattern was unlike anything they had seen before. It pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. The asteroid itself was huge, almost 10 kilometers wide. But when they looked closer, they realized it was not just a rock. Hidden inside the asteroid was something amazing. It was a spaceship, but not like any ship they knew. This ship was enormous, 5 kilometers long and 2 kilometers wide. The hull was made of a strange metal that their scanners could not identify. The ship had smooth curves like it had grown naturally instead of being built. Alex was very excited when he saw the ship. He ran more tests on it and found that it was very old. The computer said it was at least 50,000 years old, maybe older. This was incredible because humans had only been in space for a few hundred years. Someone else had built this ship long before humans even existed. The strangest thing about the ship was the writing on its hull. The symbols looked almost like ancient human writing, but that was impossible. The ship was too old. How could aliens have writing that looked like human symbols? Alex spent hours studying the markings through the ship's cameras. Jake decided they needed to get closer to study the ship properly. Ryan flew the Endeavour carefully through the asteroid field until they were right next to the ancient vessel. Up close, it was even more impressive. The hull seemed to glow very faintly with its own light. The metal surface was perfectly smooth with no dents or scratches despite being so old. They tried to find a way to get inside the ship. Lisa used the ship's cutting tools to try to make a hole in the hull, but nothing worked. The strange metal was too strong. They looked for doors or airlocks but could not find any. The ship seemed to be completely sealed. Sophie tried to send radio signals to the ship to see if anyone was still alive inside. She used many different frequencies and types of signals, but there was no answer. The ship stayed silent and dark. After 3 days of trying, Jake made a decision. They would set up a base camp on the asteroid and study the ship from the outside. Maybe they could learn something without going inside. Ryan flew a shuttle down to the asteroid surface and the crew set up their equipment. The asteroid had very little gravity, so they had to be careful not to float away. They put up a small shelter and brought down computers, scanners, and other tools. Alex was especially happy because he could study the symbols on the hull up close. Days turned into weeks as they worked. Lisa studied the ship's energy patterns and found that they were very complex. The energy seemed to flow through the hull like blood through veins. She thought the ship might still be alive in some way. Alex made detailed drawings of all the symbols he could see. The more he studied them, the more convinced he became that they were connected to human writing somehow. Some symbols looked like Egyptian hieroglyphs. Others reminded him of ancient Chinese characters. But how could this be possible? Sophie continued trying to communicate with the ship. She played music, sent mathematical sequences, and even tried simple pictures. Nothing seemed to work. The ship remained silent and mysterious. Then one evening, something changed. Sophie was sitting near the ship's hull, playing her guitar and singing softly to herself. She often did this to relax after long days of work. As she sang an old folk song, she noticed something incredible. The symbols on the hull began to glow brighter. They pulsed in rhythm with her singing. When she stopped singing, the glow faded. When she started again, the symbols lit up. Sophie called for the others to come quickly. Jake, Lisa, Alex, and Ryan came running. Sophie showed them what happened when she sang. The hull symbols responded to her voice like they were listening. But when they tried to record her singing and play it back, nothing happened. The ship only responded to live human voices. They spent the next few days testing this discovery. Any crew member could make the symbols glow by singing or humming. But recorded voices, computer-generated sounds, and even their alien translation devices did not work. The ship somehow knew the difference between real human voices and artificial sounds. Sophie noticed that different songs made different symbols glow. She began to map out which sounds activated which parts of the hull. Slowly, she started to understand that the ship was responding to musical patterns in human speech and singing. One morning, Sophie tried humming a simple melody she had heard in the ship's computer databank. It was an old Earth lullaby that mothers used to sing to their children. As she hummed, something amazing happened. A section of the hull became transparent like glass. Behind it, they could see an airlock chamber. But the chamber only stayed visible as long as Sophie kept humming. When she stopped to breathe, the hull became solid again. The ship was offering them a way inside, but they had to keep singing to maintain the entrance. Jake realized they had made the most important discovery in human history. This ancient ship was somehow connected to humanity. It recognized human voices and responded to human music. But why? Who had built it? And what were they supposed to do now? As Jake looked at the glowing hull and listened to Sophie's humming, he knew their mission had changed completely. They were no longer just explorers looking for new planets. They had found something that could change everything humans knew about their place in the universe. The question was, were they brave enough to go inside and discover the truth? Jake stood before the transparent section of the hull and made the hardest decision of his life. Sophie continued humming the lullaby, keeping the airlock visible. The chamber beyond looked safe with normal air and lights that glowed softly. But once they went inside, there might be no way back out. He looked at his crew. Lisa was excited and curious about what they might find inside. Alex was practically trembling with anticipation. Ryan had his tools ready to fix anything that might be broken. Sophie kept humming steadily, though Jake could see she was getting tired. They decided to work in teams. Sophie and Lisa would stay outside to maintain the entrance. Jake, Alex, and Ryan would go inside first to explore. If anything went wrong, the outside team could help them escape. They set up a communication system so they could talk to each other. Jake stepped through the transparent wall first. It felt like walking through cool water. Once inside the airlock, he could breathe normally. The air was clean and fresh, better than the recycled air on their ship. Alex and Ryan followed him through the strange entrance. The airlock was small but comfortable. The walls were covered with the same glowing symbols they had seen outside. When Jake spoke into his radio to tell Lisa they were safe, the symbols pulsed brighter. The ship was listening to their voices even from inside. A door opened in the far wall when Ryan whistled a simple tune. Beyond the door was a corridor that seemed to stretch forever. The hallway was wide enough for 3 people to walk side by side. The walls curved gently like they were inside a living tree rather than a metal ship. As they walked down the corridor, strange things began to happen. When Jake spoke in a calm, steady voice, the hallway stayed straight and easy to follow. But when Alex got excited and spoke quickly, the corridor began to twist and turn. The ship seemed to be responding to their emotions as well as their voices. Ryan discovered that if he hummed while walking, lights would appear in the walls to show them the way. The ship wanted to help them, but only if they communicated properly. They learned to speak calmly and clearly as they explored. The ship was full of wonders. Some rooms had no gravity at all, and they could float in any direction they wanted. Other rooms had gravity that pulled toward the walls instead of the floor. Jake realized the ship was changing its gravity based on where they wanted to go. In one large room, they found walls covered with moving pictures. The images showed stars, planets, and strange creatures they had never seen before. When Alex tried to read the symbols under the pictures, they changed into English words. The ship was translating for them. The deeper they went into the ship, the more alive it felt. The walls seemed to pulse like they had a heartbeat. The air moved gently like breathing. Jake began to think this was not just a ship, but a living creature that had been sleeping for thousands of years. After hours of walking, they reached the center of the ship. Here they found a huge circular room with a high ceiling that looked like the night sky. In the middle of the room was a pillar of soft light that reached from floor to ceiling. As they approached the pillar, a voice spoke to them. The voice was gentle and kind, like a wise grandfather. It said its name was the Chronicler. The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. As it spoke, the pillar of light began to change shape. It formed the outline of a person, but the face kept changing to look like each of them as they spoke. The Chronicler welcomed them home. This confused Jake because they had never been here before, but the Chronicler explained that they were not the first humans to find this ship. Long ago, other humans had built it and many others like it. According to the Chronicler, humans had once been a great civilization that spread across the galaxy. They had built amazing technologies and learned to travel between the stars easily. But something terrible had happened to them millions of years ago. They had seen their own destruction coming and could not stop it. Before the end came, these ancient humans had built ships like this one and sent them out into space. The ships were designed to wait for the next human civilization to develop. The Chronicler had been waiting and watching for modern humans to become advanced enough to find the ship. Alex was amazed by this story. He asked how the ship could tell the difference between humans and other intelligent species. The Chronicler explained that human voices were unique in the galaxy. Humans were the only species that combined logical thinking with emotional expression when they spoke. Most species in the galaxy were either completely logical or completely emotional. But humans used both parts of their brains when they talked. This created special sound patterns that the ship could recognize. The ship had been programmed to respond only to these uniquely human voice patterns. The Chronicler showed them images of the ship's builders. They looked exactly like modern humans, but they wore strange clothes and had advanced technology. The pictures showed great cities on many planets and huge fleets of ships traveling between the stars. Ryan asked what had destroyed such an advanced civilization. The Chronicler's voice became sad as it explained about the Devourers. These were creatures from another part of the galaxy that consumed entire civilizations. They ate planets, absorbed technologies, and destroyed everything in their path. The ancient humans had fought the Devourers for thousands of years but could not defeat them. In the end, they had chosen to hide their knowledge in ships like this one and let their civilization die. They hoped their descendants would eventually find the ships and learn from their mistakes. The Chronicler had good news and bad news for the crew. The good news was that there were dozens of ships like this one hidden throughout the galaxy. Each one contained different types of knowledge and technology. Together they could help humanity become a great civilization again. The bad news was that the Devourers still existed. They had been sleeping for millions of years, but the ship's activation had woken them up. They could sense when one of the ancient ships came back to life and they would come to investigate. Jake felt his heart sink. He asked how long they had before the Devourers arrived. The Chronicler said they would come within a few weeks. The ship could not move from its hiding place until it completed a full awakening process, and that would take time. The awakening process required constant human interaction. The ship needed to learn about modern humanity by listening to their voices, understanding their thoughts, and sharing their emotions. Only then could it become fully alive and able to defend itself. The Chronicler asked them to make a choice. They could leave now and return to their own ship. They would be safe, but the ancient ship would remain sleeping and vulnerable. Or they could stay and help with the awakening process, risking their lives but possibly saving humanity's future. Jake looked at Alex and Ryan. Both men nodded without hesitation. They would stay. Jake contacted Lisa and Sophie outside and explained the situation. Without even discussing it, both women said they would stay too. The Chronicler seemed pleased with their decision. It explained that the awakening process would change them as well as the ship. They would learn things about humanity and the universe that would make them different from other people, but they would also gain the power to help their species survive and grow. As Jake prepared to begin the awakening process, he wondered if they were making the right choice. They were about to risk everything on the word of an ancient computer. But deep in his heart, he knew this was humanity's destiny. They had found their heritage among the stars, and now they had to prove they were worthy of it. The awakening process began immediately. The Chronicler led each crew member to a different part of the ship, where they would work with specific systems. Jake had never imagined that a machine could be brought to life through human voices, but that was exactly what they had to do. Lisa went to the biological sections of the ship. Here she found walls covered with what looked like sleeping plants and coral. The chronicler explained that these living systems helped the ship repair itself and process energy. But they had been dormant for thousands of years and needed her help to wake up. Lisa began to sing to the biological systems. She used songs that reminded her of the ocean on Earth, with sounds like whale calls and dolphin clicks. As she sang, the plant-like structures began to glow and move. Slowly, they started growing and spreading across the walls like a living garden. The more Lisa sang, the more the biological systems responded. They grew stronger and brighter. She discovered that different types of songs made them do different things. Gentle lullabies helped them heal damaged areas. Strong rhythmic songs gave them energy to grow faster. Alex worked with the ship's memory banks in the archive rooms. These contained the history and knowledge of the ancient human civilization. But the information was stored in a way that required human storytelling to unlock it. Alex had to speak the stories of modern humanity to awaken the ancient memories. Alex told the ship about human history from the beginning. He spoke about early humans living in caves, learning to make fire and developing language. He talked about great civilizations like Egypt and Rome. He described the Industrial Revolution, the space age, and humanity's first steps among the stars. As Alex told these stories, the ship's archives began to organize themselves. Ancient knowledge connected with modern understanding. The ship started to see patterns between the old human civilization and the new one. It learned that humans had not really changed even after millions of years. Sophie worked with the navigation systems. These were the most complex parts of the ship because they controlled how it moved through space and time. The chronicler explained that the ship could travel faster than light, but only when guided by human intuition and emotion. Sophie had to learn a new way of thinking about space travel. Instead of using computers and calculations, she had to feel where the ship wanted to go. She would speak her intentions aloud, and the ship would interpret the emotional undertones in her voice to plan the course. This was difficult at first. Sophie was used to precise technical communication, but the ship needed something more human. She learned to express her desires and hopes when giving directions. If she wanted to go somewhere safe, she would speak with comfort and security in her voice. If she wanted to explore, she would use excitement and curiosity. Ryan worked with the engineering systems in the deepest parts of the ship. Here he found machines that seemed impossible. They could create any tool or device he could imagine, but only if he described his ideas out loud with passion and creativity. Ryan discovered that the ship's power source was unlike anything humans had ever built. It fed on human imagination and innovation. When he described new inventions or solutions to problems, the ship's energy levels increased. The more creative his ideas, the more powerful the ship became. Ryan spent hours talking to the engineering systems about all the machines he had built and repaired over the years. He described his dreams of better engines, stronger materials, and more efficient computers. With each idea he shared, the ship incorporated his innovations into its own design. Jake coordinated all these efforts from the central command chamber. He had to keep everyone working together while monitoring the ship's progress. The chronicler showed him displays that tracked how much of the ship had awakened. They were making good progress, but it was slow work. As the days passed, Jake began to understand the true nature of the ship. It was not just a machine or even a living creature. It was something that existed between technology and consciousness. The ship needed human voices because humans were the bridge between rational thought and emotional intuition. Other species in the galaxy were either purely logical like computers or purely emotional like animals. But humans combined both logic and feeling in everything they did. This made them unique and valuable in ways they had never realized. The chronicler explained that the ancient humans had discovered this truth about their species. They had learned to use their unique nature to create technologies that no other race could build. The ships were the pinnacle of this achievement, representing the perfect fusion of human consciousness and cosmic forces. But the awakening process was changing the crew as well as the ship. Lisa found that she could sense living things from great distances. Alex could see patterns and connections that had been invisible before. Sophie could feel the flow of space and time around them. Ryan could understand the inner workings of any machine by touching it. Jake realized that they were becoming something more than ordinary humans. The ship was sharing its capabilities with them, making them partners rather than just users. They were evolving together into something new and powerful. After 2 weeks of constant work, the ship was nearly half awake. The biological systems were healthy and growing. The archives were fully organized and accessible. The navigation systems were responding smoothly to Sophie's guidance. The engineering systems had incorporated dozens of Ryan's innovations. But then the chronicler brought them terrible news. The Devourers had arrived earlier than expected. Long-range sensors detected their ships approaching the asteroid field. The crew had perhaps 2 days before the Devourers reached them. The ship was not ready to defend itself yet. It needed at least another week to complete the awakening process. Jake had to make another impossible decision. Should they try to evacuate and save themselves, or stay and hope they could finish the awakening in time? The chronicler showed them images of the approaching Devourer fleet. The ships were dark and twisted like living nightmares. They absorbed light and energy from everything around them. Jake had never seen anything so terrifying and destructive. But the crew had come too far to give up now. They had learned too much about humanity's destiny to walk away. Lisa suggested they try to accelerate the awakening process by working around the clock. Sophie thought they might be able to use the ship's partial capabilities to hide from the Devourers. Alex had a different idea. He had been studying the ancient records and found references to other awakened ships. Maybe they could call for help from ships that were already active. The chronicler confirmed that there were indeed other ships with human crews, but they were very far away. Ryan suggested they try to complete just the ship's defensive systems instead of the whole awakening process. If they could get the weapons and shields working, they might be able to fight off the Devourers long enough to finish waking up the rest of the ship. Jake listened to all their suggestions and made his decision. They would try Ryan's plan while also calling for help from the other ships. It was risky, but it was their best chance. The crew went back to work with renewed urgency, knowing that humanity's future might depend on the next few days. As Jake watched his crew working desperately to bring the ancient ship to life, he felt proud of what humans could accomplish when they worked together. They might be facing impossible odds, but they were not giving up. That determination and courage was what made humanity special, and it was exactly what the ship needed to become fully alive. The Devourers came out of the darkness like living shadows. Their ships were massive and twisted, covered with spikes and growths that pulsed with dark energy. Jake watched them approach on the ship's sensors and felt fear like he had never known before. These creatures had destroyed entire civilizations, and now they were coming for humanity. The Devourer fleet consisted of 12 ships, each one larger than a city. They moved through space by bending reality around them, leaving trails of distorted starlight. As they got closer, Jake could hear their communications through the ship's systems. The sounds were horrible, like screaming metal and dying animals. The ancient ship was only 60% awake when the Devourers arrived at the asteroid field. Jake had hoped for more time, but the enemy had tracked them faster than expected. The chronicler warned that the Devourers could sense the awakening process and were drawn to it like predators to wounded prey. Jake gathered his crew in the central command chamber. The ship's defensive systems were partially online, but they had never been tested. The weapons were unlike anything in human experience. Instead of firing energy or missiles, they projected fields of pure sound and harmony that could disrupt enemy systems. Lisa worked frantically with the biological systems, trying to make them grow defensive armor around the ship's hull. She sang aggressive songs that reminded her of territorial animals protecting their young. The living walls responded by sprouting thick, protective growths that could absorb energy attacks. Alex discovered that the ship's historical archives contained battle records from the ancient war against the Devourers. He read these accounts aloud, helping the ship remember how to fight. The stories gave the ship tactical knowledge and strategic understanding it had forgotten during its long sleep. Sophie found that she could use the navigation systems to make the ship harder to target. By speaking with confidence and determination, she could cause space around them to bend slightly. This made the ship appear to be in a different location than it actually was, confusing enemy sensors. Ryan worked with the engineering systems to create new defensive technologies on the spot. He described energy shields that could turn attacks back on the attackers. As he spoke his ideas aloud with passion and creativity, the ship's systems brought them to reality. The first attack came without warning. Devourer ships fired waves of dark energy that tried to drain the life from everything they touched. But the ancient ship's harmonious defenses created a barrier of pure sound that turned the dark energy into harmless light. Jake realized this was not just a physical battle, but a war between different types of consciousness. The Devourers represented destruction, consumption, and despair. The ancient ship represented creation, harmony, and hope. The outcome would depend on which force was stronger. The Devourers tried to communicate with the humans, but their voices caused terrible pain. They spoke in frequencies that hurt to hear, projecting feelings of hopelessness and fear. Jake ordered his crew to keep talking to each other and singing to drown out the enemy voices. Sophie made a breakthrough when she realized she could understand some of what the Devourers were saying. They were not just attacking randomly. They were trying to convince the humans to give up and surrender. The Devourers believed that all consciousness was doomed to fail, and they saw themselves as merciful collectors of the last remnants of intelligence. This discovery changed everything. The Devourers were not evil in the way humans understood evil. They were terrified beings who had chosen to consume others rather than face their own mortality. They had become monsters because they could not accept that consciousness might naturally evolve and transcend physical limitations. Jake made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Instead of continuing to fight, he ordered the ship to project messages of welcome and invitation toward the Devourer fleet. He began speaking directly to them using calm and reassuring tones. The Devourers were confused by this response. They had expected fear, anger, or desperate resistance. Instead, they heard human voices offering understanding and cooperation. For the first time in millions of years, someone was not trying to destroy them or flee from them. Lisa supported Jake's approach by singing lullabies toward the enemy ships. Her gentle melodies carried messages of peace and comfort. The biological systems in the ship responded by projecting healing energy instead of defensive barriers. The ship was offering to heal the Devourer ships rather than destroy them. Alex began telling stories about redemption and forgiveness from human history. He spoke about how civilizations could change and grow, how enemies could become friends, and how fear could be transformed into hope. These stories carried deep emotional truth that even the Devourers could understand. Ryan used his engineering skills to project blueprints for technologies that could help the Devourers instead of harming them. He described machines that could create instead of consume, tools that could build instead of destroy. The ship's systems transmitted these designs as gifts. Sophie established the first real communication link with the Devourer fleet. Using her linguistic abilities and emotional intuition, she created a translation protocol that allowed meaningful dialogue. The Devourers began to share their own story of loss and terror. The Devourers revealed that they had once been a peaceful civilization, much like ancient humanity. But they had faced a cosmic disaster that threatened to destroy all consciousness in their part of the universe. In their desperation to preserve something of intelligence and awareness, they had become collectors and consumers. They had spent millions of years gathering the knowledge and consciousness of dying civilizations, storing them in their ships to preserve them from the cosmic disaster. But in doing so, they had lost their own original nature and become the very force of destruction they had once feared. Jake realized that the Devourers were trying to save consciousness in the only way they knew how. But their method was flawed because they preserved only the form of intelligence without its spirit. They had the knowledge of countless civilizations, but none of their hope, creativity, or love. The ancient ship's chronicler joined the conversation, speaking to both the humans and the Devourers. It explained that consciousness was not meant to be preserved like artifacts in a museum. Consciousness was meant to grow, change, and evolve. The Devourers had been trying to save something that could only survive by continuing to live and develop. Slowly, the battle transformed into something unprecedented. The ships on both sides stopped firing weapons and started exchanging ideas. The Devourers shared their vast collected knowledge while the humans shared their hope and creativity. The ancient ship facilitated this exchange, acting as a bridge between two very different forms of consciousness. Jake watched as enemy ships began to change before his eyes. The healing energy projected by the ancient ship was actually working. The twisted, corrupted hulls of the Devourer vessels were slowly returning to their original forms. The creatures inside were remembering what they had been before fear and desperation had transformed them. But the most amazing change was happening to the ancient ship itself. The contact with the Devourers was completing the awakening process faster than anyone had expected. The ship was learning that its true purpose was not just to preserve human knowledge but to heal the wounds that fear and despair had created throughout the galaxy. As Jake felt the ship reaching full consciousness around him, he understood that humanity had passed its greatest test. When faced with an enemy that seemed impossible to defeat, they had chosen understanding over violence, healing over destruction, and hope over fear. These choices had unlocked the ship's ultimate capabilities and opened a new chapter in the history of consciousness itself. The transformation of the Devourer fleet was the most beautiful thing Jake had ever seen. Ships that had looked like living nightmares were slowly returning to their original forms. The twisted metal straightened into elegant curves. The dark energy that had surrounded them was replaced by soft, warm light. Sophie established permanent communication channels with the reformed Devourers. They had remembered their original names and histories. They called themselves the Preservers, and their true mission had been to protect consciousness from cosmic disasters, not to consume it. The chronicler arranged a meeting between all the conscious beings present. Jake found himself in a virtual space created by the ancient ship, sitting at a circular table with representatives from 3 different forms of life. There was himself representing current humanity, a holographic figure representing the ancient human civilization, and a being of pure light representing the reformed Devourers. The ancient human explained that consciousness in the universe went through cycles. Every few million years, cosmic forces would threaten to destroy all intelligent life. Different species had tried different solutions to this problem. Some had chosen to transcend physical existence entirely. Others had tried to preserve themselves through technology. The Devourers had chosen to collect and store consciousness to protect it. But the meeting revealed a 4th option that no one had tried before. Instead of escaping the cosmic cycles, transcending them or hiding from them, conscious beings could learn to work together to heal the universe itself. The damage that caused these cycles could be repaired if enough different types of consciousness cooperated. Humans were uniquely suited for this task because they naturally combined logic and emotion, individual creativity and group cooperation. The ancient humans had begun this work but had not completed it before their civilization ended. The Devourers had the knowledge and experience of countless civilizations but had lost the hope and love needed to use it properly. The ancient ship was designed to bring these different elements together. It could serve as a meeting place where transcended consciousness, physical consciousness, and preserved consciousness could work together. But it needed human voices to coordinate this cooperation, because humans alone could speak to all 3 forms of awareness. Jake and his crew were offered a choice that would change their lives forever. They could return to their normal existence and report their discovery to Earth. Other humans would come to study the ship and eventually learn to use its capabilities. This was the safe option that would benefit humanity over time, or they could stay with the ship and become permanent bridges between different forms of consciousness. They would travel throughout the galaxy, finding other sleeping ships and awakening them. They would mediate between species that could not normally communicate. They would help heal the cosmic damage that threatened all intelligent life. This second choice would mean giving up their old lives completely. They would become something more than human, but also lose their connection to normal human society. They would gain incredible knowledge and abilities, but also take on enormous responsibilities. The crew discussed this choice for hours. Lisa wanted to stay because she was fascinated by the biological systems and the possibility of studying life forms throughout the galaxy. Alex was excited about preserving and sharing the knowledge of countless civilizations. Sophie was drawn to the communication challenges and the opportunity to create understanding between vastly different species. Ryan wanted to help awaken the other ships and see what technologies they contained. He dreamed of engineering marvels that could heal planets and create new forms of life. Jake felt the weight of leadership and responsibility. He knew that someone needed to coordinate these efforts and speak for humanity and the galactic community. In the end, they chose to stay. But they also arranged for regular contact with Earth. Other humans would come to learn from the ship and eventually take over some of the responsibilities. Humanity as a whole would gradually take on the role of cosmic mediators and healers. The ancient ship became their permanent home. It could travel instantly between dimensions and across vast distances. The crew established the first interspecies research station in one of the ship's expanded sections. Here they studied how consciousness developed in different environments and how various species could work together. Lisa created biological laboratories where species from across the galaxy could share their understanding of life. She discovered that consciousness was not limited to biological forms, but could emerge from any sufficiently complex system. Her work helped heal species that had been damaged by cosmic disasters. Alex became the keeper of the galactic archives, collecting and preserving the stories of every conscious species they encountered. His libraries contained not just facts and data, but the emotional truths and cultural wisdom that gave meaning to existence. He helped species rediscover their lost histories and identities. Sophie developed the Universal Communication Protocol, a system that allowed any conscious being to communicate with any other, regardless of their physical form or mental structure. Her work made it possible for species to cooperate even when they had completely different ways of thinking and perceiving reality. Ryan oversaw the awakening of dozens of other ships hidden throughout the galaxy. Each ship had different capabilities and was designed to work with different types of species. Together they formed a network that could respond to cosmic threats and help consciousness evolve safely. Jake coordinated all these efforts while serving as humanity's ambassador to the galactic community. He learned to speak for his species in councils of beings, so advanced they had transcended physical existence. But he also maintained contact with Earth and helped prepare humanity for its new role. Years passed as the crew worked to heal the galaxy. They encountered species that had been at war for millions of years and helped them find peace. They discovered civilizations that had been trapped in stagnant cycles of thinking and helped them break free. They found worlds where consciousness was just beginning to emerge and protected it from cosmic disasters. The reformed devourers became their closest allies. The knowledge they had preserved from destroyed civilizations proved invaluable in understanding how consciousness developed and what threats it faced. Working together, they began to map the cosmic forces that caused the cycles of destruction and creation. Slowly, they learned to predict and prevent cosmic disasters. They could not stop all of them, but they could help consciousness survive and adapt. The universe was becoming a safer place for intelligent life, and new forms of awareness were emerging that had never been possible before. Jake often stood in the ship's observation deck, looking out at the stars and thinking about the journey that had brought them here. They had started as simple explorers looking for new planets. Now they were guardians of consciousness itself, helping to shape the future of intelligence in the universe. The ship had grown and evolved along with its crew. It was no longer just an ancient artifact, but a living partner in their work. It had learned to understand human emotions and dreams while teaching them to perceive cosmic forces beyond normal imagination. One day, as Jake was reviewing reports from newly awakened ships across the galaxy, Sophie brought him an interesting message. It was a transmission from the edge of known space from a region where no intelligent life was supposed to exist. The message was simple, but extraordinary. Another ancient ship had been discovered, floating in the void between galaxies. But this ship was different from all the others. According to the transmission, it only responded to one very specific type of human communication. It would only awaken for the sound of human children laughing. Jake smiled as he read the message. The universe was full of wonders they had not yet discovered. Somewhere out there was a ship that had been waiting millions of years to hear the pure joy and innocence of human laughter. It was probably designed to work with the youngest and most creative members of their species. He thought about all the children on Earth who would grow up in a universe where humans served as bridges between different forms of consciousness. These children would inherit a galaxy where cooperation and understanding were normal, where species worked together to create rather than destroy. Jake realized that their work was just beginning. Every ship they awakened revealed new mysteries and possibilities. Every species they helped opened new paths for consciousness to explore. The universe was vast and full of potential, and humans had found their place as the voices that could unlock it all. As he prepared to investigate this new discovery, Jake felt grateful for the choice they had made. They had given up their old lives but gained something infinitely more valuable. They had become partners with the universe itself, helping consciousness grow and flourish wherever it appeared. And it all started with the simple discovery that an ancient starship would only answer to a human voice.